Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to all of you, wherever you are, to the first webinar, New Generation, or I should say to your TV program, FeedChannel.online. Every 2 months, you'll have the opportunity to address some of your concerns, from the practical issue to the scientific explanations, with experts from all over the world, from university as well as industry. For each webinar, field situation will be first addressed by testimonials through videos, interviews from the field, and then two scientific experts or keynote speakers will introduce a scientific basis to support those issues, to explain those issues. And then a roundtable will allow you to really ask your questions openly to these invitees. It is our first FeedChannel webinar today, and we are pleased to welcome so many participants. So I just remind you that you can at any time post your question on the site during the program. Now, let's start with oxidative stress and its impact on animal protein production, challenging its sustainability. Our animals are like sport athletes. They have a huge genetic potential, but they might be quite fragile to express it, and they can face a lot of stressful situations like hot conditions, like subclinical disease or dietary imbalance or quality of the feedstuff. But they have this stress situation, and all those stress situations may have oxidative components, and we propose today to better understand those issues with our experts. And our scientists today are the well-known Professor Peter Surai from Scotland, that you all know with his huge and vast knowledge on antioxidants and oxidative mechanisms, and Dr. Mario Estevez from Universidad de Extremadura in Spain, who is expert on meat quality, not only from the muscle but to the meat after slaughter, and also from pork to broilers. Now, a week ago, we interviewed Dr. Fabrice Robert from CCPA. He is R&D director of CCPA. He's also a veterinarian in Janzé in France. And he explained how he perceives the oxidative stress in young chicks as well as in piglets, and how it is related to lots of issues animal production is facing. So let's listen to Fabrice Robert first.
I'm Fabrice Robert. I'm in charge of the R&D department of the CCPA Group. CCPA Group is a premix company, and we are working with feed manufacturers. The story about oxidative stress began here 12, 13 years ago, when we wanted to explore the relationship between stress situations in farms and nutrition. Is there some nutritional needs that we don't take into account when we formulate the feed during this specific phase? And what we have found when exploring these specific phases of the life of animals is that during this stress situation, we induce, well, this stress situation induce oxidative stress, or could induce oxidative stress, and at the same time inflammation. So stress induces an increased response of the innate immune system. For example, when we look at the level of oxidative stress measured through the level of hydroperoxides in the blood of chicks the day they come into the farm, and we relate that with the level of mortality during the 10 first day, we can see a very good correlation, a positive correlation, between the level of hydroperoxide in the blood of the chicks the day they enter the farms and the mortality during the 10 first days. So we can say that oxidative stress is a risk factor for health and mortality in farms, not only for the chicks but also for other species. And during the same trial, we have seen that the level of acute phase protein that are used to evaluate the level of inflammation measured at 10 days in the chick's blood is correlated negatively with the growth of the chicks. So there is a game between oxidative stress and inflammation. One of the both is inducing the other one, but we don't know really the way it works. But oxidative stress is inducing, most of the time we see the same things in other species. Oxidative stress is increasing the risks of diseases and mortality, and the inflammation is decreasing the productivity of animals. And what we have seen after the weaning of piglets, it's a high amount of hydroperoxide in the blood of the piglets. This is an indicator of oxidative stress, and a huge amount of acute phase protein also in the blood of animals. This is an indicator of high inflammation phenomenon. On healthy animals, we can't see anything from outside of the animals. They look healthy, but they are not. And that's this huge level of oxidative stress explain why the sensibility of animals is higher for diseases at that time. And the high level of inflammation, we all know that inflammation has high energy costs, so it explains the decrease in the growth and the decrease of feed efficiency at that specific period of time. And probably the beginning of the story for the piglets at weaning in the gut. We all know that we have inflammatory phenomenon in the gut of the piglet just after the weaning.
Oxidative stress is not only a challenge at the animal level, it's also a challenge for the one in charge of the product finally consumed. We asked Dr. Thierry Mocotel from LDC Group in Sablé-sur-Sarthe in France to explain us what are the challenges he is facing and how oxidative stress is really perceived at the meat producing level. Let's listen to Thierry Mocotel.
LDC is a French leader of poultry industry, both on the retail and food service markets. I am the person in charge of research and development within this company. Our first major concern is related to the progressive increase of muscle growth issues, wooden breast, white stripping, Oregon disease, both on chicken and turkey meats. These problems are observed at a large scale in conventional and elaborated products. We do not know precisely the origin of these defects. We only can say that they have a very significant impact on meat quality. We also have evidence of links between meat acidity and quality during shelf life. This has been demonstrated especially on turkey red meat. A red meat with a lower pH is facing a bad evolution during shelf life, particularly a negative change of coloration. Scientific studies have already given evidence on the relation between oxidative stress and meat pH. As a conclusion, I would like to say that these elements are key issues for us and have a very high economic impact. These issues have to be solved if we want to deliver a consistent meat quality to our customers.
We got the concern from the industry and what are they facing day to day. But is that oxidative stress per se, and what is the fundamental basis of the mechanisms involved? Peter, can you help us to better understand what do we mean by oxidative stress and what are the basic mechanisms we need to know to find solutions?
Yes, when we are talking about oxidative stress, I would like to start from the expression that we are living in a dangerous world of free radicals and we need some kind of protection. This means that free radicals are produced in nature, they are very dangerous, they are very damaging, and we need some kind of umbrella. We means chickens, piglets, ourselves, and this umbrella called antioxidant protection, which is built from antioxidants which are synthesized in our body, coming from feed ingredients as well as from feed supplements. And what are free radicals? So free radicals in a simple terms can be described as activated molecules of oxygen. We know that oxygen is absolutely essential for human and animal life, especially for energy production, but once the molecule oxygen is activated, becoming free radicals, this molecule will be very damaging, very dangerous. And if we look at major sources of free radicals in natural situation, we could say that mitochondria are the major source of free radicals in biological system. We know that mitochondria actually are responsible for energy production. However, the energy production has never been 100% efficient. That's why some electron from electron transport chain can escape and produce so-called superoxide radical. And this superoxide radical, this is the first step of free radical production. And the second source or major source of free radicals in biological systems are phagocyte cells. For phagocyte cells, production of free radicals is an essential process. They use free radicals as a weapon to kill pathogen. However, we need to remember that free radicals can also damage phagocytes themselves. Therefore, the antioxidant protection is a key for maintenance of effective phagocyte function. And free radicals are very important for signaling inside the body between cells, and therefore to maintain this balance between free radical production and their scavenging by antioxidant is a most important process in biology. And we actually can consider three major levels of antioxidant defense. At the first level, we are talking about specific enzymes, in particular superoxide dismutase, which actually can convert that superoxide radical into non-radical products together with glutathione peroxidase, catalase, and some other elements. However, if we look how many of those radicals are produced in nature, we are talking about at least 20 billion of free radicals to be produced in every cell every day. The number is very high, and this number in physiological conditions, so in stress conditions, this number will go up. Therefore, the first level of antioxidant defense is not potent enough to prevent damaging effect of these 20 billion of free radicals. Therefore, there is a second level of defense and third level of defense. And these three levels of antioxidant defense in the cell are responsible for prevention of those damages which potentially free radicals can do for the cell. And actually what we need to know that in the cell and in the body in general, all antioxidants are working together. It's a teamwork. And in this team, every member has its own job to do. So we can call vitamin E like headquarters of antioxidant defense, carotenoids communicating services of antioxidant defense, vitamin C special forces of antioxidant defense, flavonoids antioxidant police, and selenium we can call chief executive of antioxidant defense. Chief executive means that there are at least 25 selenoproteins in animal and human body which are responsible for maintaining antioxidant defenses, for maintaining other processes in the body, and they are regulating antioxidant system in general. And if we look at the cell, we can see that practically every part of the cell is protected. We can talk about membranes, where polyunsaturated fatty acids can be easily oxidized and damages to membrane can take place. We are talking about cytosol. We are talking about nucleus, where DNA can be damaged. Therefore, natural antioxidants are distributed within the cell, and every part of the cell is well protected by antioxidants. And the most important point I'm making today is that there is a very delicate balance between antioxidants and pro-oxidants. And depending which part of the balances will go down, we are talking about good antioxidant protection, maintenance of growth, development, and health. Or alternatively, if another part of the balances goes down due to high production of free radicals or high stress conditions or just misbalanced diet, we will be talking about free radical overproduction and damages to healthy tissues, which eventually will actually affect productive and reproductive performance of animals. They will affect animal health. Therefore, for the nutritionist, the most important task is to maintain this balance, which is responsible for growth, development, productive and reproductive performance. One side of this balance is like gut health. When we look at the gut, there is a delicate balance between antioxidants and pro-oxidants, and we need to take care of it. Or alternatively, if we look at in general in the cell, this balance is determining many physiological functions. And this balance actually is a redox balance of the cell. And we know today that the redox balance of the cell is responsible for activation of or expression of many different genes. Therefore, this is a fundamental balance which we need to take care of. And if we're coming back to stresses, we know that in commercial animal production, in poultry production, and pig production, and in general any animal production system, there are plenty of stresses, and we cannot avoid them. And therefore, those stresses actually increase free radical production. And for the last 20 years, more and more information has been accumulated to show that at the molecular level, most of stresses in animal production are related to oxidative stress, are related to disbalance between free radical production and antioxidant defense. And therefore, the nutritional means of preventing damages by those free radicals is a key issue for nutritionists in poultry production, in pig production, and generally speaking, if we look at the effect of those free radicals, the first effect, we can look at the reproduction. Why? Because the spermatozoa of chicken or pigs or bulls, they contain high proportion of polyunsaturated fatty acids. And these fatty acids are very vulnerable to lipid oxidation. They are very sensitive to lipid oxidation. And then we need antioxidant defense, a good balance between antioxidant and pro-oxidant to maintain the structure of spermatozoa. And in particular, one case we can describe like in selenium deficiency, we actually can see damages to the neck of spermatozoa. So when neck of spermatozoa is damaged, there is no motility. No motility, no fertility, as simple as that. Therefore, to provide optimal antioxidant supplementation with the diet is a key issue to maintain semen quality in animal and poultry production. And if we go further in terms of effect of free radical on health, the most important part is actually effect of overproduction of free radicals to immune system. The problem is that immune system is very complex system, very important system, but very sensitive to free radicals. Because we know that immune system includes billions of lymphocytes and millions of phagocytes, and all these cells are responsible for immunocompetence, for protection of the body from invaders. And these cells must do work together. Again, it's a teamwork. And all these different types of immune cell must talk to each other to make a decision how to deal with the situation. And if you ask a question, how they communicated between each other, and the simple answer is mobile phone. Something like mobile phones, which we call receptors, are responsible for communication between different immune cells. And what's happened in stress conditions? In stress conditions, those damaging free radicals can actually break those communicating devices, and once the communication is broken, the immunocompetence goes down, and all those billions and millions of immunocells will not be effective in protection. Therefore, to maintain antioxidant pro-oxidant balance, to maintain high antioxidant defense is a key. And we also need to mention that there is a process of adaptation to stresses, and this process of adaptation is going through activation of different transcription factors, and this redox balance I mentioned already, the redox balance is responsible for activation of various transcription factors and to maintain adaptation to stress. And as an illustration from the biological point of view, how actually antioxidant protection can deal with oxidative stress, we can consider, for example, the issue with selenium, because we know that selenium is a chief executive of antioxidant defense I mentioned already. There are 25 selenoproteins, and they are responsible, first of all, for antioxidant defense. It's proven that at least half of selenoproteins are involved in antioxidant defense. They are also responsible for redox balance in the cell. They are responsible for maintaining sperm structure. They are responsible for regulation of thyroid metabolism, as well as protein folding and protein quality in the body. Therefore, if we look at those selenoproteins, what they do, they actually prevent oxidative stress. They prevent damages done by free radicals. Therefore, the major message of myself today is we need to balance antioxidant and pro-oxidants. We need to make sure that balance is optimal to maintain animal health, and this will give us good productive and reproductive performance and, of course, economical return.
Thank you, Peter. You mentioned, in fact, the link between oxidative stress and immune system. Fabrice Robert, in his interview, addressed the link between oxidative stress and inflammation. It seems that you agree altogether on the link between oxidative stress and those mechanisms.
Yes, actually inflammation is a part of the activity of immune system, and we know that there are different transcription factors in the body, and one of them called NF-kappa B, this transcription factor specifically responsive for synthesis pro-inflammatory cytokines. Therefore, the activation of this factor is responsible for inflammation. And what is also important that this transcription factor is under the control of redox balance. Therefore, when we have excess of free radicals, redox balance is changing, this transcription factor is activated, and we have the process which we cannot control, inflammation. Therefore, the task for nutritionists to make sure that this antioxidant pro-oxidant balance is correct, then the level of inflammation will be minimum as it is needed, and everything will be all right. Therefore, we will maintain immune system in the best possible immunocompetent status.
Thank you, Peter. When addressing oxidation and oxidative stress, we all think about animals, about the stress facing by the animal. We forget sometimes the consequence on the product produced, like the meat. And I think it's important, Marius, if you can help us to better understand the basis of oxidation and the consequence on the meat quality and particularly also the meat defaults.
Yeah, of course. Making a very clear statement, a very clear idea that meat quality should be our main concern whenever we are talking about poultry production, because this is actually the ultimate purpose of poultry production or livestock production, to sell the product, the final product, in this case the meat. So we really need to preserve meat quality. So we can actually use the most prolific and proficient genetic breeds, we can use the best and most optimized feeds from the market, and we can handle the animals with extreme care. But if the final consumer is not satisfied, then we actually have a problem. So meat quality should be preserved. And actually oxidation is a main threat to meat quality. In terms of sensory properties, oxidation is able to spoil the sensory properties of meat in terms of flavor, odor, texture, and also the appearance, the color of meat. And there is an increase in concern among consumers in relation to the connection between meat intake and some health concerns. And actually oxidation is playing a major role in that connection, which is something that we have to take into consideration. But oxidation is not only relevant from the consumer point of view, but also from the industrial point of view. Because in fact, oxidation is also a major threat to the technological suitability of meat. That means that oxidation, for instance, is able to reduce the shelf life of meat when they are in the retail display, particularly for affecting the color of meat, of red meat, like in this case, like for instance, beef or turkey. And then also oxidation is responsible for spoiling the technological properties of meat, so that when oxidation is present, the successful production of some particular muscle foods can be compromised, because the water holding capacity and some other functional properties of meat can actually be impaired, can be affected. So now that we know that oxidation is actually critical for meat quality, I'm going to tell something more about it, because as Peter said, oxidation of course takes place in the living animal, but also afterwards. In the meat, after a slaughter, the meat is actually very sensitive to oxidation due to some biochemical changes taking place after a slaughter during the transformation of muscle into meat, what we call aging, meat aging. Then we have a collection of factors such as the collapse of the waste of some of the antioxidant defenses, also the release of pro-oxidants, the pH decline, and then the exposure of the meat to air, to oxygen. All these factors are creating a very intense pro-oxidant environment in the meat, so that the meat is really sensitive to oxidation. And after a slaughter, during storage and during processing and cooking, of course, any technological process that we may apply to the meat will increase the susceptibility of lipids and proteins to oxidation. And I would like to highlight something relevant at this point, is that whenever oxidation takes place at a particular stage, like for instance in the living animal, the consequences will not only be suffered by the animal. The negative consequences of oxidation will also appear later in the following stages, for instance in the meat. The meat from animals that suffered that oxidative stress will also be more susceptible to oxidation, with consequences on meat quality. So it is relevant to recognize the negative consequences of lipid and protein oxidation at every stage, so that we can identify the problem that we have and then develop or apply a specific antioxidant solution for our problem. For instance, whenever oxidation takes place in the living animal in vivo, that usually leads to a low meat quality and low technological suitability. We probably have acid meat, meat with a low pH or fast pH decline that leads to PSE or PSE-like meat, and then some other myopathies, like those mentioned before by the industrial partner, the white striping, the wooden breast. And at this stage, it is extremely relevant to have some kind of antioxidant strategy. In this case, the nutritional strategies are really critical, are really paramount, because in this stage, we can enhance the oxidative stability of animal tissues by manipulating the feeds that we are giving to the animals, in terms of modifying the fatty acid composition or including some antioxidant additives. And the interesting point about these nutritional strategies is that as well as the oxidative damage, when we have this antioxidant protection, is not only for the animal. When the animal is slaughtered, those animals, the meat from those animals will also be protected afterwards, during the storage and during processing, which is actually very interesting. After a slaughter, when oxidation takes place in the meat during storage or aging, usually also leads to low meat quality, and in this particular case, protein oxidation is actually playing a critical role, even more than lipid oxidation, because protein oxidation is believed to be responsible for a low water holding capacity, which is reflected in a drip loss, the loss of water during processing or during storage. It's also responsible for increased toughness, hotness of the meat, and it's also responsible for some color problems, which is actually reducing the shelf life of meat at this stage. Of course, we can apply some antioxidant solutions at this stage when the meat is displayed, using a suitable packaging or even including some antioxidant additives. And finally, during processing and cooking, lipid oxidation is very typically reflected or manifested as the onset of rancidity and also some other off flavors. And protein oxidation, again, is usually reflected as low water holding capacity in the meats, and also which is in a way which is affecting in turn some other quality traits such as juiciness and hardness. And then in this case, we can also apply some technological strategies based on food formulation, and also try to optimize some technological processes so that we keep oxidation at low levels. Before going to the end of my speech, I would like to talk about the increased incidence of some emerging chicken breast defects, such as the white striping and the wooden breast. Both are myopathies, and both are becoming, or they are actually right now at this moment, real headaches for a lot of poultry producers. Basically because we don't know which are the causes, the reasons behind the onset of the incidence of these new myopathies. And because we don't know which are the underlying mechanisms of this pathogenesis, so it's difficult to fight against the problem, try to reduce the incidence of both myopathies. And what we know for certain is that both myopathies are related to big animals, to fast growth. And that is actually, in that we can find the connection between these myopathies and the oxidative stress. Because a big animal with fast growth, accelerated metabolism, probably the production of free radicals is higher than in a, let's say, normal animal with a normal growth. And those free radicals can actually perform biological damage, and also in a way there are some recent studies proving that they may be involved in the upregulation of some particular genes involved in the fibrosis and the lipidosis that actually are some symptoms of these myopathies. So anyway, now going to the end of my speech, I would like to give some take-home messages. In a way, I understand that one main concern of industrial partners is to keep the business alive and well. And to me, one very good advice is to keep the consumer satisfied. Because this is, as I said before, the ultimate purpose of poultry production. To have meat that is actually appreciated by consumers. So we have to keep the consumer satisfied, we have to focus on meat quality, and then also we have to keep the farm sustainable. If we want to keep poultry production and livestock production alive and well for a long time period, we really have to make it sustainable. And that means that maybe we have to change a little bit the priorities in animal production, maybe to make it slowly. Maybe you have to focus on the quality of the feeds, because the quality of the feeds will be reflected afterwards in the quality of the food, in this case, the meat or the eggs. And definitely we have to make it sustainable. And I think that in the near future, these are the issues that should be covered.
Thank you, Mario. So you are both interested, in fact, by the consumer, the final product, and so from the sustainable to the quality of the product. So many questions arrived during your presentation, and we'll try to answer to some of the questions, or at least the main topics. But I would like to remind people that you still can post questions on the website during the discussion. So to start, I suggest to take the first question, please. Okay, do mycotoxin in raw material induce oxidative stress? I may ask maybe Peter to start to answer on that.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and I've been working on this subject for a number of years and publishing a few papers and reviews, and the major conclusion is that at the molecular level, most of mycotoxins impose oxidative stress. We can talk about T2 toxin, which mainly impose oxidative stress in the gut, and damaging gut actually will cost a lot for poultry and pig producers. We are talking about DON, we are talking about ochratoxin, aflatoxin, fumonizins. So generally speaking, most of mycotoxins actually impose oxidative stress. Most of mycotoxins are immunosuppressive because this oxidative stress, as I mentioned before, can damage those communicating devices. And most of mycotoxins impose apoptosis, which is a programmed cell death. Therefore, from the point of view of nutritionists, to deal with mycotoxins is very important, but it's very difficult questions because there is no magic bullet. There is no full solution for this problem in animal industry because on the market there are plenty of various solutions, including various adsorbents, but we need to be realistic. There is no an adsorbent which can absorb 100% of those mycotoxins. Therefore, part of them, maybe 30% or 40%, can escape those binding, and they will go to the the liver, where they will be detoxified, and during the detoxification process, the liver can be damaged. Therefore, antioxidant supplementation, antioxidant strategy is a key to deal with those mycotoxins. On the other side, DON is mainly metabolized in the gut. Again, we need to maintain that balance between antioxidants and pro-oxidants in the gut to make sure the detoxification of the DON is going well. Therefore, from the point of view of nutritionists, we need to have in place a good antioxidant strategy to deal with those mycotoxins which are actually immunosuppressive, which are damaging gut, which are damaging liver, and which actually decrease productive and reproductive performance.
Thank you, Peter. You want to add some comments, Mario?
Well, actually, Peter is the true expert in this field, but of course I can add something because, in fact, as I said before, it is not possible to have a good meat quality without having a good feed quality. So mycotoxins is one of those factors that have to be controlled because, in fact, they have an impact on the animal and also an impact on the final product. So, in a way, decisions that we make at the farm has consequences on the final products, and this is something that we have to take into consideration. The feeds should be of high quality, and of course the presence of mycotoxins is something that we should avoid as much as possible.
Thank you, Mario. Another question coming from the web? That's maybe related to what we said before. Is oxidized fat in the diet a source of oxidative stress? And I think it's quite interesting because we talk about the stress at the gut level, but how can you link that oxidized fat and oxidative stress?
There is definitely a linkage in here, yes. In fact, because not only for animals, also for human beings, it is proven that whenever we intake oxidized lipids and oxidized proteins, right after that, there is an increase in the level of some lipid and protein oxidation markers in the blood and urine and some other tissues. So it is very clear that some lipid and protein oxidation products, some oxidized amino acids, and then some low molecular lipid oxidation products, they are present in the food, and then of course after intake they will be in contact with the intestinal mucosa, and actually they are having some activity in there, and actually Peter can actually talk about that because in a way affect the gut health, not only in animals but also in human beings. And then after that there is an intestinal uptake, so they are absorbed and then they go through the bloodstream and they are distributed to different organs. And so obviously there is a direct impact of what we can call dietary oxidative stress and then oxidative stress, because what is basically an increase of oxidation products in our blood, in our tissues, and then they will have some negative consequences. So definitely returning to the idea that feeds should be controlled in terms of quality, we should avoid using feeds with high oxidation levels. And that also takes me to the idea that polyunsaturated fatty acids are also dangerous in feeds because they are very sensitive to oxidation. It is more likely to have high oxidation rates when we are having feeds enriched in polyunsaturated fatty acids, unless we include, of course, some antioxidants naturally. But
thank you, Mario. Maybe Peter, you can add some comments on that, and particularly at the gut level. I think
at the gut level, as I mentioned already, there is this delicate balance between antioxidants and pro-oxidants, and oxidized fat, which is coming from the diet, is a major contributor to the pro-oxidant part. And we need to realize that the quality of the fat in the diet is related to the price of the diet. So sometimes producers are looking for cheap fat, and if this cheap fat is oxidized, there could be consequences. We can look, for example, on the breeder side, because what happens is part of the oxidized fat can be transferred into the egg, and then during embryonic development it's imposing additional oxidative stress, which will be related to increased mortality during embryonic development and postnatal development. And we know today that the maternal nutrition is a key actually for the productive and reproductive performance of progeny. So on this side, at the side of epigenetics, we now can say that it's very dangerous dangerous to play with oxidized fat, at least in the breeder diet. We know that oxidized fat can have negative consequences for broilers and for other animals, but when we're talking about breeding animals, it could be sow, or it could be a chicken breeder or poultry breeder, then at this site we need to avoid as much as possible those oxidized fat, which are cheap, but cheap does not mean effective. Therefore, from this point of view, supplementation with antioxidants, the antioxidant system maintenance is a key issue to actually prevent those damages which oxidized fat can actually impose.
Thank you, Peter. Maybe another question from the web? You said free radicals are used as weapons against bacteria, play a role of messenger. What about too high antioxidant intake?
Well,
so we are really dealing with a balance. Huh?
Yeah, we are talking about balance, and actually too much of good seed could be bad seed. And because generally speaking, if we look at the immune system, this very, very delicate balance is responsible not only for production of free radicals, which is under the control of the cell, but the signaling processes are very important to maintain that protection to the actually to the maximum efficiency. And therefore, too much, okay, there is not much actually evidence, but there are some publications say that overdose of vitamin E probably can affect immune systems. That could be one example, that too much of good thing can be bad. If we look at the selenium side, we know that high dose of selenium can, especially in the form of selenite, can impose oxidative stress, and this will be also bad. And in general terms, when we look at the diet in general, we have plenty of various antioxidant compounds, and we need to make sure that we have that optimal balance I'm talking about. I mentioned in my figures that, for example, flavonoids are considered as antioxidant police, and there are plenty of publications actually claiming that flavonoids are very good antioxidants. However, if you look more closely what is done with them, they are very good antioxidants in the tube. They are very good antioxidants in vitro. They might do a good job with meat quality when you add them directly into the meat. However, they are not well absorbed. Therefore, they can do probably a good job in the gut, but beyond the gut, it's not the direct antioxidant effect. Yes, they probably can affect transcription factors and be involved in other mechanisms of maintaining the antioxidant system. But we cannot say today that flavonoids in the liver have direct, for example, in the liver, have direct antioxidant effects. Therefore, for the nutritionist, it's a difficult job to find that a proper balance which gives the best results in terms of stability of antioxidant in the feed, stability antioxidants and their absorption in the gut, and the delivery of those antioxidants to target tissue when they can have that effect. And therefore, to finalize this answer to that question, yes, too much of good thing could be bad. Therefore, the balance is a key.
So our job as nutritionists is more difficult. In fact, you have to balance, but we have also to deal before the absorption and after the absorption when we look at the meat aspects.
Mm-hmm. So well, in fact, I think that the question is actually very pertinent and very clever. And the situation is very complex, particularly with flavonoids, with these phenolic compounds, what they are usually called natural antioxidants. And here we also have this connection between animal nutrition and human nutrition as well, because some of these compounds, some vitamins like vitamin E, vitamin A, and vitamin C, as well as flavonoids, they are sometimes used as nutritional supplements. And there are actually many studies carried out by accredited and really famous and recognized experts in the field, stating that actually they are not as good as they appear. Let's say that probably we shouldn't call them antioxidants. At least they are not antioxidants always. So we probably should refer as redox active compounds. And sometimes they act as antioxidants depending on the concentration, the dose, and also the circumstances. And sometimes they act as pro-oxidants. And something that is making everything even more complicated is that sometimes the pro-oxidant actions of some of those phenolic compounds can actually be positive, in a way that whenever this pro-oxidant is in the body, is sending some kind of message to the tissue, so that, okay, now we have to synthesize more endogenous antioxidant defenses. So a little dose of pro-oxidant redox compound sometimes is good, so that to maintain and to keep a good antioxidant status in the body. So everything is very complicated, and for phenolic compounds it is really, really complicated. I think that we have ahead a lot of studies that we have to carry out to understand the biological effects of these compounds.
So thank you. So it's really important to look at the complexity, but also try to clarify.
My last remark to this one could be, sorry to interrupt you, that absolutely, Mario is absolutely right, that flavonoids actually affect transcription factors, being pro-oxidants.
Yeah.
So their effect on actually antioxidant system, not due to antioxidant property, but more pro-oxidant property. That's a complicated thing, but we know that they are still important part of the animal nutrition.
Thank you. Maybe we have another question. What is the difference between meat maturation and meat conservation? Are oxidative mechanisms involved in both issues? And that's quite something very, very interesting. You talk about before meat aging, meat maturation, so we are confounded.
Yeah,
you know.
well, there are several concepts, and sometimes they are mistaken. Meat maturation, or what we usually say meat aging, is the period of time that goes from the slaughter to the point in which we consider meat as such, so something that we can eat or we can use as a raw material for producing some other muscle foods. And then, of course, after slaughter, the meat is something that we need to preserve because it's very easily spoiled by microorganisms. So, in a way that for trying to find the connection between the meat maturation and meat conservation, in a way that during that period of time of meat maturation, we really need to apply some kind of a strategy to keep the meat in good conditions. That means that we need to control microbial growth. That's the first issue. And then, of course, we should also control oxidation.
Yeah, we need to preserve oxidation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So this aging is actually a very critical period of time. Sometimes it's overlooked, but it's actually critical, particularly for red meat, because during that period of time there are a set of biochemical changes, including, for instance, the proteolysis carried out by some endogenous protease that present in the meat, and that is actually making the meat more and more tender. For instance, this is called the tenderization process of meat, which is actually, we have to do anything. It's just to let the meat age, which is this aging idea, and then the meat will be more tender and so on. But of course that the color is a different issue, which is actually directly connected to oxidation, to myoglobin oxidation. So it's a very critical period in which we have set of biochemical reactions. Some of them, the consequences, some of them are very good, like the tenderization. Some of them, like the oxidation of the myoglobin, is not so good because it's turning oxymyoglobin, which is responsible for the red bright color of fresh meat, into the metamyoglobin, which is responsible for the brown color of meat that has been aged, so maturated for a long time. So it's a very interesting question, but maybe also very complex, very complex to cover.
Thank you, Mario. Maybe another question from the web. Oxidative impairs male's fertility. What about female? That's an often question. You show the spermatozoid defects and so on, but what happens at the female level?
Yeah, if we look at the female level, let's take the chicken first. So we can have a look at the egg. We put the egg into the hatchery, and during 21 days we will have a chicken. So what's happened? First of all, egg yolk contain pretty high proportion of polyunsaturated fatty acids, and those fatty acids can be oxidized. And more importantly, during embryonic development, embryo synthesizing polyunsaturated fatty acids, and the level of polyunsaturated fatty acids in the newly hatched chicken is most doubled in comparison to the egg. So we're talking about more than 50% 50% of total fatty acid in the newly hatched chick liver are unsaturated. Therefore, they are very sensitive to oxidation. We know that hatching process itself is an oxidative stress because we have high temperature. At the time of peeping, we have oxygen coming in, we have high humidity, so this imposes oxidative stress, and therefore the antioxidant defense of the egg yolk could be a key to get a viable chick. That's the one side. If we look at the female side from the sow, for example, yes, sow also is under the stress, in stress conditions, and the piglet birth is also stress, and again, high proportion of polyunsaturated fatty acid in newly born piglet impose oxidative stress, and they are very sensitive, and therefore what they get antioxidants from colostrum and milk, and this is the most critical part of the development of the piglet, to get as much as possible antioxidants through colostrum and milk. However, there are some restrictions on that one. Restriction in terms that placenta is not good for transferring them. Therefore, for nutritionists, it's a bit of headache how to deal with it, how to provide optimal antioxidant defenses for newly born piglet, for newly born chicken, or any other animals.
Okay, thank you very much, Peter. Maybe we have a last question regarding the main stresses faced by young animals. You talk about the chicks, you talk about the piglets.
Yeah.
Do we consider that the birth and the hatching is maybe one of the critical issue?
Yeah, actually, when you talk about production, commercial animal production, or commercial poultry production, the stresses, if we look at the poultry production, stresses started from placement egg into hatchery, during incubation period, the hatching process is stress. Then we have transport, or we have holding time after hatching. Chicks are in boxes waiting to be delivered to the poultry house. That's another stress. Then during transportation, especially if we're talking about breeder chicks, which can travel 1 or 2 days maybe by plane between different countries, this is another stress. Then the placement itself in the poultry house with high temperature, with high humidity, and with changing of the feed, because you know that during embryonic development, last week of embryo development, chicken actually consume exclusively protein and lipids. And when they phase the feed in the poultry house, it's mainly carbohydrates. So there are a lot of changes which are stressful. Then we have vaccinations. Vaccinations are also impose stress. Then we mentioned already mycotoxins. We can talk about other stresses like transferring birds from rearing houses to breeder houses. Then coming to the pig production. It's also very high stress, because when we are talking about layers which can come 97, 98 of leg A percentage, it's a very high stress for the liver, because the most compounds of the egg is synthesized in the liver. Therefore, as you see, the whole process is a stress, stress, stress. If we look at the pig side, it's still the same, because at time of farrowing, it's a very high stress for sow. Then we have weaning time. So the weaning is the biggest stress for the piglet. Again, changing from the milk into the dry feed, which is this transition period is very difficult. In many cases, the feed consumption goes down and piglet can actually lose some weight. Then after that one, we get still having some vaccination, change in feed. It's also stress. So to actually summarize, there are plenty of those stresses in animal production. We cannot avoid them. We do our best to decrease those stresses, but the nutritional strategy, it's a key. The nutritional strategy is a key, because the most of antioxidants, important antioxidants, are coming with the feed, and if we have that optimal balance, it will give us the highest productive and reproductive performance and high economical return.
Thank you, Peter. So more and more questions have been posted on the web, so we will not address all the questions, unfortunately, but you will get the answers in the days and following weeks. I would like to warmly thank our today's speakers from the industry and from the science, and I think you have accepted to be the guinea pigs of our first TV program, our first new type of webinar, so I think really we warmly thank you first. You will be able to listen to all the see interviews, presentations, and discussions on the web through a podcast. And we hope you enjoy this first webinar, and that it's only the start of a new series. And I think you will be addicted in the future to this series. So we give you appointment for the next FeedChannel program that will be on the 13th of December. You will be informed on due time. You will receive email. You will receive notifications. So this next webinar will be on gut health. So you will see the link between the oxidative stress, I would say, and now going to the gut health. So I would say I could not be a good guy without thanking also the 3 persons behind the screen that manipulated and organized the questions from the web. So Sophia, Michael, and Sonia. So thanks very much, and bye-bye everyone, and looking forward to seeing you in December.